The Saints should be selling at the trade deadline today, and the New Orleans Pelicans should be giving Willie Green Das Boot before the holidays. We'll be talking about that and more today on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And welcome everyone to the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. Appreciate you as always for listening in wherever you are. And also make sure you subscribe to us if you haven't already, be it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you are. You can check us out and enjoy what we bring to the table here on the Louisiana Lunch Hour podcast. And I want to start out right out of the gate by repeating a statement that I said a few weeks ago, because we were kind of fast approaching the trade deadline, and we were kind of thinking that, this Saints team, the tank is officially in place. And right here, right now, it looks like this Saints team is going to be a team with a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, which is great. But I genuinely believe this team needs a lot more than just the 5 picks they have. So at the end of the day, I believe this Saints team should be trading anyone and everyone they can to get some form of compensation for the 2026, maybe even 2027 NFL draft. Because in my mind, you use that as draft capital to move up in some of these earlier rounds. You have to kind of get rid of those and move up in the second and third rounds. Because at the end of the day, you don't need to take flyers on guys in the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. You need those picks to get you into day 2 very easily. And more importantly, set yourself up for long-term success. This is a rebuild. Emphasis on that. We're all understanding. That's why we don't necessarily believe that, even though Kellen Moore hasn't looked that great, it's desperation. He's trying to get this team a win on the board. And when you have a team that is 1-8 and you're throwing out Tyler Shaw, who looked a lot better, but your run game is looking like complete trash. And I think it's more because the tread on the tires of one Alvin Kamara aren't the same. He's a guy I think you should at least consider sending off and let him go do whatever he wants to do. It'd be great to see him retire as a New Orleans Saint, but you have to get some value for your team into 2025's, before the end of 2025 season. You need to get some value off of these guys and start moving forward. And if they don't, I genuinely am concerned, am confused. As a longtime fan of this franchise, is why are we just relying on having these one or two people, one of these 2 or 3 choices, where we're going to say, hey, these are the 5 picks we go with. These are going to be the guys that we rely on. I'm wanting more picks because you can move up into day 2 very easily with some of those picks that you probably were going to use and they weren't going to make an impact. You need impact players here and now. So if you're the New Orleans Saints, you got to focus on that. First and foremost is getting guys that you have that aren't necessarily panning out one way or another. Use them as draft capital. If you got to get, some second stringer rando, why not? But you have to find some trade partners today. I don't know who they would be exactly, but if you don't, especially with the situation that you're in right now, where you are going to be locked into, I think, a top 10 pick over the next 2-3 seasons, because it's not going to be overnight. Everybody wants this to be a quick fix. It's not going to be. It is going to be a long, arduous trip forward for this Saints franchise. They are right now the number 1 pick in the NFL draft this coming season. In fact, Walter Football, they put out their updated mock draft, and the Saints are picking at number 1. And it's a little confusing with the selection that they made now that they're the number 1 pick, and going with Ty Simpson out of Alabama. Now, Alabama quarterbacks historically just don't pan out all that well in the NFL over the last decade or so. I'm not sold on getting a quarterback in this draft. I understand that Tyler Shaw hasn't necessarily shown you anything really. Spencer Rattler has been, Spencer Rattler. He may not be part of the team anymore. But if we're just going to continue to grab the quarterbacks that seem to be, the guys that you like, but they're not going to pan out all that well, brother, it's going to be an uphill climb. That's just how I see it. I'd much rather go get, the kid out of Miami, the defensive end, Keldrick Falk out of Auburn, anybody. Give me some beasts. Give me some dogs on the defensive line. Because Cam Jordan, I feel like he's going to retire after the season. Demario Davis isn't getting any younger. He may retire after this season. You need to find guys that are going to be dogs on defense. You need to find guys that are dogs in terms of weapons at wide receiver. If you don't, it's going to be hell to pay for this team long term. I understand that, a quarterback is that sexy thing, but I don't think that's going to fix any issues at all. It's not going to fix half the issues you have if you're a program like the Saints. It's not going to fix a single solitary long-term issue if you only have 5 picks in this year's draft. The number 1 pick, I think Ruben Bain should be a guy you pick. Offensive line should be something, because Cesar Ruiz, he's here probably out of the league. You've got to find some people that are going to make an impact immediately, and more importantly, stay healthy. That's the ultimate challenge that this team is going to have going forward, is just stepping their game up. Bottom line, you have to perform very well in about 2 to 3 years. If you don't, by the time we get to year 4 of the Kellen Moore era, I think he might be being shipped off somewhere else and you're rebuilding yet again. I think you have to nail what you do with this year and next year's draft, and you do that by getting more picks. I just feel like get more picks one way or another, and today is a perfect opportunity to do that. That said, it feels like, based off everything that I've heard, that's not going to be the case. Definitely going to be fun to kind of keep track of everything going on today. We'll recap it all on Wednesday's podcast. If anything did happen, I'll give you some in-depth analysis on what they did and whether or not it was the right decision to do so. And I'll kind of flip it over from the team in the Crescent City that plays inside the Superdome. I'll go to their next door neighbors, and that is the New Orleans Pelicans. I think we need to have a serious conversation. We talked about it a little bit on Monday's pod after recapping what happened with the New Orleans Saints. And everybody was obviously more focused on the football game because, the NBA season just started. You usually kind of start really shifting your focus over to that side of the New Orleans fan base once you get past Christmas, once you get through the end of the regular season, which feels like it's getting there slowly but surely. But this Pelicans team is 0-6. Put it quite bluntly, that's not what you want to do. That's not where you want to be. And I think it's more disheartening and disgusting because of what happened on Sunday afternoon, where you got whooped by 31 points by a Thunder team that did not have their top guys. Here were the leading. They had SGA, and at the end of the day, that's all they needed. They didn't have anybody else that was a true mega star. Jalen Williams had 12 points. Aaron Wiggins had 15. Those are the two guys pretty much right behind SGA, who had 30 points, 2 rebounds, and 7 assists. The man was in fuego against a Pelicans team that is a tire fire. It's amazing to me how much this team has fallen off the face of the planet. And I think some of that you have to consider Willie Green being the root of this problem. And it made me kind of think Sunday night after taping the pod and also throughout the day on Monday, questioning this Pelicans team, very, 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 very mediocre. You have to. You have to make a change in a big way. And I think it's time to start thinking about life after Willie Green. It hurts to think about that. But you pretty much need to move on from Willie Green because of what's happened with this team. It just feels like there is no, energy behind this team. It feels very, very bad juju with this franchise. And yes, getting rid of Willie Green and having Zion Williamson deal with yet another head coaching change. This will be going on his third coaching change. If everything I think will happen, he's going to go through yet another coaching change. And I feel like eventually he's just going to be like, all right, I want out of this team. And that's going to hurt the long-term sustainability of this Pelicans franchise. The fans are checked out at this point. I think there are some diehards, but the fan base is not the same as what it was a couple years ago. It's not, just straight up. And I'm hoping that we can see this franchise build up and we can see them build up get some forward momentum. But at the same time, I just feel like you have to wonder if there's even some motivation, to even move forward. There's no promotional calendar for the season. The Pelicans stopped having watch parties for the NBA draft. Zero kind of marketing. It's just hashtag Pelicans on social media. There's zero motivation. You go back to the David Griffin era. He pushed the ownership to spend money on things that made the Pelicans look like a well-run basketball organization. It did not lead to winning, and he was given Das Boot. Now you got Joe Dumars, who feels like he is about as inept as Dell Demps was. And nobody seems to give one single iota. And if we continue to see this loop happen time and again, like seriously, if we continue to have this loop happen every few years, we get a top flight player and then eventually they want out the door, I've got to consider, if I'm Gail Benson, cutting my losses and selling, even if it costs you this franchise and they move over to a different part of the world. That's just how I see it. If I'm wrong about that, y'all can have your opinion on it. Let me know in the comments on YouTube. I just firmly believe that this Pelicans team has to make some changes. And it's all going to start at the head because that team just does not have the same oomph that it did a few years ago, back when Anthony Davis was there, back during that playoff run where they looked really good. If not for Boogie Cousins getting injured, I feel like that team could have been in the conference finals. Maybe a pipe dream thought, but I feel like that was a lot more feasible than what we've seen since, especially in the Zion Williamson era where he has not been able to play as consistently. He's getting better, but it's still a lot of work left to do for this team. I'll stick into basketball for it, but we'll get back to football shortly because I do want to talk at least a little bit about Frank Wilson's time at the podium on Monday, heading into the big game against Alabama in prime time. The Louisiana Raging Cajuns started off the new era for Quannas White, and they came up short, losing 75-64. I think the biggest problem one game in is there's not a lot of depth in the bench. You only had one player hitting double figures, outscoring the rest of the bench by a mile, and that's Devon Laverne Davion Laverne with 10 points. He had 4 boards and 4 assists. Meanwhile, everybody else, he had Joshua Lewis, Todd Jones Jr., and Kyron Ratliff combined for 8 points. So he outscored the rest of the bench. And that's wild, especially when you compare it to what Ball State did. Their starting 5 played the majority of the contest. You had, 3 other players come off the bench for Ball State: Cam Denson, Jawan Maxey, and Elmore James, and all those guys got quality minutes. You definitely had to rely a lot on Davion Laverne. He had 30 minutes of time off the bench. Credit where credit's due to Jamiron Keller. 34 minutes of playing time, 21 points, 1 rebound, 4 assists, a steal, and a block. The stats just didn't show a whole hell of a lot of kind of congruency. There were a good bit of turnovers, 12 of them to be precise. 3-point shooting left a lot to be desired, 9 of 28 compared to, Ball State. They had a team combined 8 of 15, a little more than 50% from 3-point range. That's what you want to see. So that's the stuff immediately that's going to stand out to me. It's going to be a long season. Ball State seems like they're a good program, 1 game in that MAC SBC challenge. So I think this Cajuns team, we're not going to see immediate results, but I'd say keep an eye on them. Once we get into conference play, I feel like we'll start to see who exactly this Cajuns team is. That's just the way I'm going to see it. And we're definitely going to keep an eye on that amongst the other teams across the state of Louisiana as we start to kind of pivot over. College football's in the final month of the season. LSU's not going to be in the college football playoff. Maybe they won't even be in a high-tier bowl game. Cajuns, seems more likely than not, they're not going to be a part of it. Southeastern Louisiana, the best team in the boot, 7-2. They're probably going to be making a run in the postseason. So we'll be talking about that and a whole lot more as we get towards the new year. But I think once we get to late December and conference play, we're going to be talking a whole hell of a lot more about the world of college hoops. One last thing before we wrap up today's podcast. There was one note in particular I wanted to get to when it comes to Frank Wilson and his time at the podium today, because I think it's just damning with what was said from Frank Wilson talking about Blake Baker. The defensive coordinator said he requested more physicality and simulated game situations in practice since the coaching change that happened last week. And that is amazing, especially when you go more into it. Is Blake Baker asked for his defense to see more physical inside runs in practice. That way they can practice against what they'll see in the SEC. And I think Frank agrees with that. Now, Frank Wilson is more a running backs coach. He understands the position very well. That's going to be a big thing for this team going forward. I've talked about it a lot ad nauseum about how much the run game just has been incredibly mediocre over the last few games. How atrocious it's been. If you want to get this team back on track, I think the biggest thing you have to fix is your offense. And the run game is number one with a bullet. Whoever you have as the head coach, if Frank Wilson keeps the job and goes from interim to permanent head coach, a la Ed Ogeron, who should never be a head coach at LSU ever again. I don't care what any, quote unquote journalist, podcaster says, and I'll get on that soapbox in a second. But you need to get this offense in line, and you need to start working on improving the run game. Because the numbers I've seen this season compared to what I saw in the decade prior, that's laughable. I feel like Leonard Fournette would be pulling up to practice and be like, what the hell y'all doing, guys? Like, this is not the LSU that I was a part of. This wasn't, and again, We talk about DBU and how great the wide receivers have been over the last few years. The running back has been the bread and butter of this team. One running back in particular wound up making that program fun again. And I'm talking about one Kevin Falk. And yes, I have a little bias. I'm from Carencro. But at the same time, that guy made the program fun to watch again. Leonard Fournette was an absolute beast. Darius Geis, monster. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, damn near untouchable. You need to find those dogs in the run game, and I think you'll be able to see this team get a lot better. But I do want to kind of say this real quick, and then we'll truly wrap up the pod today, because I saw this just before I taped, and that was a post from Bomani Jones. Used to be part of ESPN. Really a fun guy, I'll say. But I feel like he's having a little bit too much fun saying on his pod, The Right Time of Bomani Jones, saying there's one obvious pick to be LSU's next head coach. 3 years of Ed Orgeron, LSU might win another national championship. No. Ed Orgeron got you in this position in the first place. You need your head examined if you unironically, emphasis on unironically, believe that he is going to be the guy to turn you around. I'm sorry. That is not the direction you want to go if you're the if you're the LSU Tigers. You don't want to go back to Bebe in any capacity. I feel like he shouldn't be anywhere near the campus. It's just not a great look overall for this team if we see LSU go back to Ed Orgeron. If you do that, I feel like you're going to be, you'll get what you earn, basically. You deserve from him. Is he a fun guy to be around? More likely than not. I've never talked to him before. But if you seriously think this is the answer that's going to get you back into prominence, and as you said last week, we need to win national championships every couple of years. That's not going to get you in the college football playoff conversation year after year after year. And with all due respect, I saw some people bring this up as well about going get, some of the higher ups over at McNeese to come over, the AD, as well as the president of McNeese, to basically take over those respective programs. And then you just give Frank Wilson carte blanche. Again, Frank Wilson did spend some time at McNeese. I'm just not sold on it long term. It just seems like you're also rearranging the deck chairs within the state of Louisiana with the college system. But that's a different conversation for a very different podcast. We're more sports oriented, and we appreciate you for listening in today's pod. We'll talk about a lot more concerning the LSU head coaching vacancy as the week progresses onward. Until then, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Make sure you go ahead and follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. Also follow us on social media. Just search Louisiana Lunch Hour. We'll be right there for you. Talk to you later.